Okay.
So this is the interview of John. This is John Gause from the University of New Orleans conducting the interview of Ron Ludwig. It is 12:57 p.m. on November 25th, 2022. We are here in the H. Mortimer Favreau Jr. Auditorium, courtesy of the National World War II Museum. This interview is conducted on behalf of the University of New Orleans Oral History Community Project, and it may be of interest to future historians. So I have this release form here describing the transfer of copyrights from us to them, acknowledgement of the possibility of future publication, and access by researchers. This is all done, of course, in good faith. If publication becomes a necessity, I personally will let you know, and we can readdress the information and edit from there. And on that note, I would like to formally begin the interview. How are you doing today?
Found my way here.
Excellent. So just a little introductory information first. Where are you from?
Originally, in a small town, St. Charles, Missouri.
And what year were you born?
1947.
Excellent. What school did you go to growing up? Schools did you go to?
Benton is a grade school,
Mm-hmm.
which happened to be the same school that my mother and grandparents went to.
Mm-hmm. And
then St. Charles High School, which was the only high school in the county when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Southeast Missouri State University, Holy Cross University in New Orleans, McNeese State, and Georgia Tech.
What was the reason for bouncing around like that?
I went to Southeast Missouri until I was a junior.
Mm-hmm.
I decided that the draft was closing in,
mm-hmm.
and that it would be much better if I enlisted in my choice of services,
mm-hmm.
rather than being surprised by the draft.
Fair enough. Do you keep up with any old friends from your hometown?
Yes, I do.
Excellent.
Of course, now with the internet, it's much easier.
Mm-hmm. And of course, given the progression of time, how do you think things have changed in your hometown from then up until now?
When I was growing up,
mm-hmm.
the town had 8,000 people in it. The interstate highway has come through,
mm-hmm.
and the town is now at well over 200,000 and growing leaps and bounds.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing like
Absolutely.
when I grew up.
Mm-hmm. Do you prefer the smaller town or something like?
I like the neighborhood that we're in New Orleans, mm-hmm. because while we're still within a reasonable sized city, the neighborhood is inconvenient and fairly closed off.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, you get the nice protection of living in a smaller community, but all the access to the bigger city.
Yes.
Excellent. What was your family life like as a kid?
I have one brother.
Mm-hmm.
Grew up in a four-room house behind my father's service station. So it was able to walk to school, walk home, live 2 blocks from the high school.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very, of course, very neighborhood oriented, because mm-hmm. everyone, most of the World War II vets were all having children around the same age. Mm-hmm. So it's busy.
Absolutely. So what were you doing? You mentioned you were going to college before the war.
Yes.
Was there a turning point when you decided to join rather than being directed?
I wanted more when they were doing the numbers, the draft numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be able to have a choice, and I wanted to be able to choose the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
So I went Navy rather than wait around and see what would happen with the draft or how things would progress from there.
Mm-hmm. And that was 68, right? When did you actually enlist?
68.
Okay. I assume after the Tet Offensive?
Yes.
Where'd you go to basic training?
Beautiful Great Lakes,
Mm-hmm.
Naval Training Center, Great Lakes,
Excellent.
outside of Chicago.
Mm-hmm. How'd you like it?
It was basic training. I had, excuse me, an uncle who was career Navy.
Mm.
Of course, my father, his friends in the Army, etc. So I was smart enough going into boot camp that I had an automatic promotion after boot camp to an E3.
Mm-hmm.
But the company commander, etc., had absolutely no idea that I was one of those college boys
Mm-hmm.
until he saw me sewing the additional patch on.
Yep. Do you think that education really helped you through your service?
It made not a lot of difference. It was the fact that I had the education that allowed me to go in. I was allowed a choice in career within the framework of the Navy. And I thought payoff has sounded good. So
And what did you end up choosing?
the payoff is,
Oh, sorry, excuse me, yeah.
yeah.
Did you do any advanced training, any other like technical schools while you were in the Navy?
We had to, of course, do what at that time they called the A school level. So you had to go off and learn the military pay system, the equipment that was used. Actually had to qualify as a typist.
Mm-hmm. What was that like?
Insane. You know. I had taken typing during a summer in high school, so I was used to the typing tests, etc. But you had to do that.
That sounds fun.
So when it came to the end of the A school after boot camp, everyone else had their orders except me. The class ended and everyone else went off, and I had to move to the transit barracks and had absolutely no idea what was happening. And a week and a half later, I got orders to the Philippines.
So what did you know about Vietnam before you got sent overseas?
A number of guys that I went to high school with had already been over there, had come back, talked about it. One guy that I had gone through from grade school through high school went into the Army, and a year and a half after high school graduation, he was shot by friendly fire leaving the hospital in Vietnam. So that was my first experience, losing someone that I had known for an extended period of time to something like that. But it was,
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he had been shot, he has been through the recovery process, was walking out of the hospital, and another Army private decided to shoot up the hospital.
So, yeah. That's a very shocking story before you even got there. Did you have anything that happened? What was the most shocking experience of what, like, arriving in country? Culture shock or something like that?
Well, I went to the Philippines.
Mm.
So getting off the plane in Clark and then being transported by bus to the base in the Philippines,
Mhm.
seeing that at that point, as they said, roughly 2/3 of the people still lived in raised huts.
Mhm.
There weren't a lot. The roads were they were paved, but some of them had been paved at the end of World War II.
Mhm.
Okay. Seeing the farming still done by water buffalo,
Mhm.
uh, that was quite an awakening.
So speaking with a couple other Vietnam vets, they talk about the weather difference being a big shift. But given that you're from the South, did you think that it was more just more of the same?
It, it's more intense. The heat is much more intense.
Mm.
The sun's, I mean, you definitely have to pay attention. Yes,
Mm.
but yeah.
And so once you got to the Philippines, how long was it until you got your ship?
Actually, I was able to spend 2 years in the Philippines before they sent me to the ship.
Excellent.
The USNSD
Mm.
was a major supply depot for the actions off the coast of Nam and for support in Nam. So they needed people at the supply depot to refill the supply ships,
Mm.
to refill the carriers and the carrier groups, etc., that would pass through Subic Bay before going to the gun line.
So what sort of experiences did you have in the Philippines versus on the ship in
The Philippines was very easy
Mm.
because those of us who were base sailors had many more privileges than those on the ship.
Mm.
We could basically come and go as we wanted. We had to make our duty stations in times, but we had a lot more freedom. We could do a lot more roaming around.
Mm.
I was able to travel throughout the Philippines while I was there, make it to the Manila, the main capital,
Mm.
Baguio, the summer capital. Now, of course, Marcos was president at that time,
Mm.
so there were issues, but being a base sailor
Mm.
was
The way to do
really
it.
the way to do it. As long as we were never, Subic was never, that I know of, directly attacked by the communist insurgents.
Mm.
There were issues around Clark, the air base in the middle of the island,
Mm.
but we were pretty well on our own. So it was easy duty,
Yeah.
to keep up with things. I used to run the obstacle course with the Marines.
Mm. Stay up there. Yeah. Did you feel like you were in danger at any point before you got to Vietnam?
Really, The one time was actually traveling back from a weekend trip to Manila. I am not sure with we had drivers in special services cars. They did not let us run around driving. And the driver started jabbering, and you could see Filipino troops on the side of the highway, and he put his foot all the way down on the accelerator in that big V8 Chevy, and did not let it off until we got to the bay. So I knew that there had to be some
reason for it.
Some problem going on. Not that I wanted to be involved in it.
Yeah, better avoid it for sure. How did you keep up with friends and family while you were there?
It was, of course, at that time, just letters. I was able to make a couple of phone calls back. During the time that I was there, my father had a severe heart attack, and I was sent home on leave, emergency leave. So after that time, I tried every couple of months to at least make a phone call back to see what was happening.
Did you guys get to attend like USO shows? Were they?
There were USO shows. Bob Hope showed up once. But it seemed I always had to do. In the Philippines, there were 3 of us non-Filipinos in the office. And we were at the bottom of the food chain. So when it needed to have a holiday or something come along, the 3 of us were at the bottom of the food chain.
Given that the Army and the Navy were desegregated by that point, did you see any other racial tension among other sailors or soldiers?
I actually saw a Navy commissioned officer walk the entire length of the main street on base and never get saluted once because he was black. So was it there? Yes, it was. Was it still present? It was very obviously present. I was surprised that at that point that, and I'm talking about a number of blocks. I'm not talking about one block or it had to be 5 or 6 blocks that there was not a single salute the entire and I was just not something that I had expected. The officer corps was, of course, vast majority white. But I was just really surprised that even at that point.
Still very tangible. And you mentioned your interactions with the Filipino staff as well. Was there any difference between their treatment of you versus like the African American treatment by other white individuals?
The the E7, the chief for our group, would actually stand up and say, because there are only the three of us that we're not Filipino. I need two of you Americans over here. Not two of the seamen, not two, or not by name. No, I need two of you, two of you Americans over here to do such and such. I mean, granted, we were at the bottom of the food chain, but, it was not necessarily the appropriate. And then, of course, when it would come time for evaluations, the officer in charge had been enlisted Marine who got a fleet appointment to the academy. And he was not unaware of what was happening. One of my evaluations says, blind acceptance of authority more than compensates for average ability. So I was called into his office and said, "You signed this thing?" Yes, sir. "Why did you sign this, son?" I said, "Well, that's what the chief said." "If you wish to take your signature back, I will have him change it." And I said, "If he doesn't change it, maybe someone else will understand what the working situation is other than you."
Yeah.
And I left it stand, so somewhere in the records it says blind acceptance of authority more than compensates.
Excellent.
Average ability. Was
just a workhorse.
Yes. So I did, excuse me. I made E5 with less than 2 years service. And in the Navy, the process is you have to take the test, you have to pass the test, and you have to be within the number of open billets. So you've got 3 things that you have to hit against. And so I made it in less than 2 years. So my average ability got somewhere.
Exactly. That's fantastic. Did you ever experience, given how late you were there in the war, did you ever experience any anti-war sentiment? And then what did you think of the anti-war protests back home?
I received more than one letter from my church at home explaining the help that they would provide if I decided to move to Canada. Which I thought was rather inappropriate. I knew, including my high school class president, had in fact moved to Canada
Mhm.
to avoid the draft. I thought it was a bit ridiculous for them to expect someone who had signed up to desert
Mhm.
and hide out in Canada. That was a big disappointment. In the States, the ship was home ported in Seattle.
Mhm.
Seattle was, of course, a major protest location.
Mhm.
Uh, and with short haircuts, we stood out
Mhm. Especially in Seattle.
in Seattle. Um, so on one occasion, I was definitely in the middle of downtown Seattle, and a major protest march was coming through, and I thought retreat was the best thing to do. So I went into a Hallmark card store and hid out in the card store
Mhm.
until the protests
Had gone by.
had gone by, and then went the opposite direction when I left the store.
Mhm.
I figured that was just the best thing.
Just avoid the confrontation.
Yes, hide behind the greeting cards
Yeah,
in a Hallmark store.
yeah,
Better place.
exactly. Did any of your fellow sailors express any sentiment while you were in country?
They're really at that point not, they were not necessarily happy with where we were and what was happening,
Mhm.
but nothing openly anti-war at that point.
Mhm.
Um, it, I mean, we had all signed up to avoid the draft.
So you were all actual enlistees?
Oh, yes. At that point, yeah, the Navy was getting enough people avoiding the Army draft that
They had too many
they had
volunteers.
too many volunteers. They didn't need.
Mhm. Did you ever run into any other service branches while you were there? Besides Marines? I mean,
The of course, the Air Force was a major player, and then I would actually deal with South Vietnamese Army and Marine folks.
Mhm.
Um, one of the reasons, I'm going to assume one of the reasons that I had the opportunity to interact with them was I had a level of French speaking
Mhm.
that could communicate with them that the Filipinos in the office did not have.
Mhm.
So I was able to communicate
Mhm.
and make things understood.
Did you ever have any problems with dealing with them? Were they ever?
Oh, no, they were never, they were South Vietnamese, so they were on, I assume on our side, or we were on their side, however,
Mhm.
and so it worked out. I never had an issue with it.
That's good. Did you ever get, I guess, if you were all volunteers at that point, had you been together for a long time, or did you still get like replacement guys coming in?
the Navy was running on a regular rotational basis.
Okay.
So you would do your 18 months to 2-year tour, and then you would move on. So when my time was coming to an end in the Philippines, they always ask you, what would you like? Where would you like to be stationed? And not knowing any better, I said, well, I would really like a ship out of Seattle. Not knowing at that time that there was really only one ship out of Seattle. And that's where I ended up.
They gave you what you asked for.
And they did exactly what I asked for. The one ship out of Seattle. So going on the ship, I was an E5. I was taking an E7 billet, replacing an E7. So it was an interesting adjustment in a whole lot of ways.
How so?
Well, the other E5 in the office had been an E5 longer than I had been in the Navy. Second class.
Yeah.
Longer than I had been in the Navy. And I'm taking the E7 billet. So there were delicate issues,
of course,
to be worked through. And I was the one with the 45, so
yeah, exactly.
I had the gun. But anyway, yeah, it was going onto the ship, never having been shipboard as an E5. Brought challenges, adjustments, trying to work things out on both sides.
Were interpersonal conflicts difficult to deal with on ship versus on land? Just the confinement?
The confinement, definitely. We would go out for a minimum of 30 days, generally 34 to 36 days at a time without going to port. Things that normally would not mean anything, words that would be said, comments that would be made, suddenly become very inflammatory.
Can you talk a little more about that? I mean, anything specific?
Guys that in port had been out drinking together, okay, and having no problem at all on the ship would actually come to blows.
Gotcha.
Okay. Generally, sometimes it was the people that we were the closest friends with would be the ones that you take it out on. So, it would go back and forth.
Yeah, just passing the buck.
Yeah, and, so what would really get to the other guy and, bring it up.
Were there any coping mechanisms with that confinement? I mean, besides physically, did people drink or did you see any drug use while you were in the service?
Drugs weren't allowed.
Of course not.
Drugs were strictly forbidden. The AOE was fuel, jet fuel, black oil, ammunition, etc.
So you're probably not allowed to smoke.
Actually, the smoking restrictions were less on there,
Really?
okay, than on some of the other ships, because they figure if you're dumb enough,
Mhm.
you're going to blow it all up anyway. But so really, there were fewer restrictions there than on a carrier, etc. The dealing, you'd have, like, all the supply people were supposed to be together, all of the laundry people, and so you'd have these strange relationships. I I tried to get outside, okay. I would I would walk the decks at night, okay, to not be confined in a berthing compartment with no windows. I would, actually, there were times that I would set up 3 chairs and sleep in the office. Okay. 2 one way and 1 the other because the ship built. So I was able, and part of it was the hierarchy on the ship. Okay. So I was able to walk decks at night, as long as the ship was not doing underway running, wander around and get out much more than, I guess, you know, the back porch was always open to everybody, which was the area under the flight deck for the helicopters. But I would just go sit up on deck. There were times sitting up on deck at night that we were close enough to the shore that you see the tracer bullets, firefights going on, but we were still not confined.
Yeah, you were still
in a limited space.
Yeah. Did you have any trouble adjusting when you got back home? Was there any like decompression period?
There was at the end of each cruise. Yes. For one thing, what do you do with the extra time? And then again, by that point, I was an E5. I bought a car, and I took an apartment off base, off the ship.
Yeah.
So I would go back there, and stare at the boob tube, fix a can of soup,
Just unwind.
just, it was in one room, so the couch folded out into a bed, and I had the one room that I could go to. Yeah, that was mine. The rest of y'all do whatever you want to do.
Yep.
It was a nice, cheap place. And the retired Navy chief was was the manager. But so anyway, you had, there was a definite adjustment because for one thing, we didn't have, you could get off the ship. You weren't stuck.
Yeah.
If you want a funny story that goes along with it, one night the dispersing officer and I went out to a bar well away from the base and had been drinking. We come back to the ship, and they're standing at the top of the gangway was the senior supply officer. Where have the two of you been? We've had the shore patrol out looking for you, blah, blah, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Someone had tried to break into our safes.
Really?
Yes. And actually, a ship fitter had gone down and signed out tools, pipe wrenches, etc., and then had broken into the office and had attempted to break into our safes. So we had to do full accounting
of absolutely everything.
Of absolutely everything. I was very lucky. My safe came out to the penny. The dispersing officer was a bit more difficult. So he had to, actually, we failed that evening. We had to balance it the next morning.
Oh, really?
And the guy was still on the ship. They had closed, of course, nobody was getting off the ship.
Yeah.
So they got him administered the next morning.
I don't know what his plan was. I mean, you can't go anywhere.
Well, he was going to go on leave.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, he was going to go on leave. No, he was going to go on leave on Saturday morning, so he thought he'd break in the safe. And so he messed up armor plating on the safe, but never got into the safe, either of the safes.
So what was the first thing you did when you got back, like, stateside?
I went to the YMCA and took a room at the Y. And then just got out and walked around Seattle just to be able to walk Seattle. Nowhere in particular. I do not remember where I actually walked. I finally ended up at Pike Street Market, but and that's where I discovered the first Starbucks. But it was just out walking off the ship, away from all of the restrictions.
Did you ever worry about any sort of long-term anti-war sentiment affecting you? Did you wear your uniform around, or was it immediately into civilian clothes?
There were times that we were required to wear the uniform. Luckily in Seattle, we were not. The places where we were required to wear the uniform, I never really had a problem. Whether it was, well, and then in Bremerton and in Seattle and here on money runs, we of course had to be in uniform with sidearms. So we had our guns.
Yeah. Nobody's gonna mess with you then, hopefully.
You know, so we were armed. And then of course, here there was not a large anti-war sentiment.
What did you think in '75 when Saigon fell? Do you have any observations or feelings one way or the other?
I was angry. The number of friends that I had lost, the ones that had come back and lost, and that we basically just walked out. Didn't understand the political side. Didn't see why. What was the purpose? What had we done all of this for? Much like the veterans today are dealing with.
Yeah.
Why have we done this?
Do you feel that your perspective on the war has changed significantly over time, or do you feel similarly?
For that part, I still feel, why did we walk out? Do I understand that it was not winnable? Yes, but why were we really there in the first place? What silly things happened? Ammunition oiler had very little armament on it, because if it went, it went.
Yeah.
And some political move in DC, never given an explanation as to why, but we actually went so far north that there were North Vietnamese and Chinese patrol boats coming toward us. Now, we're basically an unarmed vessel. There were no other US ships around. Why are we playing that game? Warrant Officer Lacey, who was the Warrant Officer Chief Engineering Officer on the USS Pueblo when it was seized, was Deputy Engineering Officer of Sacramento. Needless to say, he was not thrilled. You have one of the security officers with his sidearm on the bridge, screaming, "They'll never take me alive, they'll never take me alive." And of course, we have no explanation as to, and of course, the CO could not have done that on his own. I mean,
yeah. So it came
he
from
would have been
someone.
really, immediately, but came from someone to have us float around in.
Hostile war.
Yes. On basically an unarmed vessel.
With no protection at all from, yeah.
A few guns, a few minor guns, but that was it. Probably couldn't have taken out those patrol boats.
Do you think, so how would you have defined victory in the Vietnam War? And do you think that that was possible in any way?
The only thing that I can see that would have come out as a victory would be having divided it like North and South Korea
Just left it where it was?
and left it where it was. I don't see how we could have taken the North. And I'm not sure why we let the North take the South. Except it was not a peninsula like Korea.
Yeah.
So they could, they were coming around the backside, sneaking through the jungle, as it were. Yeah. If we were going to let it fall, we should have let it go earlier. But then there are a lot of things we should have let go earlier.
Have you been back to Vietnam?
No.
Do you have any desire to?
No. I will go back to Japan. I'm not too sure about this in the Philippines. Thailand, but I have no desire to go back to Vietnam now. I have Vietnamese friends whose parents brought them over on boats, and co-workers, etc., etc. So I can understand them wanting to go back with family. I do not see any reason to want to go back.
Have you been to the wall?
Yes. I was lucky enough to have a job that required me to make a number of trips to Washington. So I had been to the wall. I had been to the traveling wall when it has been down here. And I've found friends' names on it. The additional items that are being donated, I'm not sure what they're going to do with those. I don't understand. For me, the wall is it. Okay. The the two ancillary statues are fine. They're over there. They're away from the wall. But, the wall is
what it's supposed to be.
What it's supposed to be. Area of contemplation of that. Much like the troop on patrol for the Korean. It signifies what it's supposed to, and that's it. I think the fact that the wall being black and a gash in the ground shows really part of it's the division that the country was going through at the time.
Very heavily symbolic. I've taken a couple different Vietnam classes on it, and coming back to the wall, it was really just, I don't think it could be any more perfect for what it's supposed to be.
she did a fantastic job. And then, of course, they have to keep adding names.
Yep. Did you bring back any habits from Vietnam, any lessons you learned, either short or long term, stuff that took a while to get out of, or stuff that you stuck with?
Living in Algiers Point, you've got the river on two sides of it.
Mm.
So one night, a couple of years after we were married, the ship's whistles were sound asleep.
Mm.
Ship's whistles were giving the signal for collision.
Mm.
And so I was out of bed and out the back door before I realized
Mhm.
that my wife realized I was up and gone.
Mhm.
So yes, I mean, some of those are going to stick with you, forever. Luckily, we're a bit further away from the river now,
Mhm.
and so I hear the foghorns. And so
Yeah.
That night, sound asleep,
Mhm.
it definitely all came back. I never did find the life preserver I was supposed to be having, but yeah.
Less important then. So what did you do after you got back, work-wise? Did you use your experience to get something that continued, or would you just want to distance yourself completely from the Navy?
Well, I did 2 years here
Mhm.
in New Orleans. And I got out, and then I was going to school at Holy Cross.
And that was
Since
75, 76?
like that, yeah. They had Vietnam veterans were not exactly on the top of the hiring list.
Mhm.
And they had a veterans readjustment program. Well, I wasn't smart enough to know any better. So I go to the federal building downtown, the Edward Rieger building, and see the VA coordinator and said, okay, where's my job?
Mhm.
Supposed to have a job.
Mhm.
Well, he actually did have a job. So I went to work on the naval support activity,
Mhm.
which is where I had been stationed on active duty, as a travel coordinator for active duty and reserves.
Mhm.
So I'd make the plane reservations and pay for the tickets, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
So that's where my government career started.
Mhm.
I went from there. Under the veterans readjustment, you can only go so high on your GS job rating.
Mhm.
So anywhere from that point forward, you have to do on your own. So I went on to an accounting job, which took me out of the requirements for the veterans readjustment,
Mhm.
but I still continued to.
Yeah.
initially I was doing political science and economics. So I had to pick up business courses and accounting courses to get the accounting degree. So I was doing the accounting business courses that I later fell across in the course of psychology course. I think that was then Chief of Naval Reserve was coming down here, so I transferred over there and got a job. Then came back to the accounting on the west bank of the river, and then got an offer from the Internal Revenue Service for the equivalent of 8 to 9 years of promotions in less than 2.
Mm-hmm.
So I headed off that direction.
Yes, for sure.
And then from the IRS, then worked my way up to being fiscal officer for them. And then they decided I should move to Atlanta. So instead of moving to Atlanta, I took the lateral transfer to the Department of Agriculture at the East. So they were going to stay in New Orleans.
And then I know that you've mentioned doing some extra work for Hollywood. How do you end up involved in that?
Will Smith.
Not to name drop or anything, but
Will Smith was doing a major production here. And so there was literally an ad in the newspaper, okay, that you could come and be an extra in the movies for free.
Yeah.
No money. You just get to be in a movie. Okay. So I said, okay, why not? So I show up. And so I was smart enough to start asking the people that were being paid, and how do you get paid for this? So I worked one day for free and then figured out from there who to sign up with to actually get paid to do it. So that's how it started.
Excellent. So what's some of the stuff that you worked on? Do you have any fun stories?
Oh, well, of course, the most fantastic was Logan with being Patrick Stewart. But a number of the NCIS New Orleans, you'll see me watching the mayor's car get blown up, and various other productions. Other short series things that were shot here. The whole resume is somewhere online.
How's that work environment different than something like the Navy?
Oh my God. Well, for one thing, if you're going to do it, it's a whole lot of really sitting and doing nothing. Okay. I take books along to read. A number of times with other folks that you've worked with in the past that have absolutely no reading material, and only carry on long conversations.
Of course.
You let me read my book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting environment. A lot of interesting people. Some of them, as soon as you see them on set, you just want to head home and say, let's call it quits for the day. I don't need the money that bad. But really, for the most part. And there are a couple of people that I've known for a number of years are now also doing it. Since they tend to be a bit younger, they're doing it a lot more than I am. But, yeah, it can be fun.
It sounds like a good time.
I tend to watch what productions I consider signing up for. Very carefully. A couple of them we're discussing. And I am not going out there in my jockstrap. I don't
Absolutely
know what
not.
to do. You know? Okay. I'm too old for that. So. But anyway.
Yeah. Excellent.
It can be fun.
And on that note, I very much enjoyed speaking with you, and I would like to bring the interview to a formal close, but I'd be happy to take a look at your photos. Stop recording.